Everyone dreams of finding that one perfect place to call home. A house where walls echo with laughter, rooms are filled with warmth, and days end with a sense of peace. For Derek and Maria Broaddus, that perfect place was 657 Boulevard, a stately, historic colonial tucked away on a quiet, tree-lined street in Westfield, New Jersey. It was more than they'd hoped for, a spacious house with character, history, and room for their young children to grow. They'd spent years working, saving, and searching for a home like this. Finally, it seemed they'd found everything they'd dreamed of. A safe neighborhood, a beautiful house, and the promise of a life they'd been envisioning. To the Broadduses, this home was not just a place to live, it was a reward, the culmination of hard work and sacrifice. The move was a new chapter, a fresh start, a place to make memories that would last a lifetime. From the moment they set foot in the house, it felt magical, almost too good to be true. The neighborhood was equally charming, with historic homes lining the streets, each house seeming to hold stories of its own. Neighbors were friendly and welcoming, quick with a wave or a warm smile. There was a sense of comfort here, a sense of community that felt rare, as if they'd finally found a place to belong. Westfield seemed like the kind of town where children could safely ride their bikes, where families gathered at local events, and where nights were filled with peace and quiet. As they unpacked, Derek and Maria could hardly believe their luck. They filled each room with their belongings, slowly bringing their unique touches to the house. The children ran through the hallways, their laughter bouncing off the walls, filling the space with life. Derek and Maria watched them, feeling a deep, quiet joy, the kind you feel when you know you've made the right choice, that you're exactly where you're meant to be. There was a sense that the house itself was welcoming them, that it held a warmth, a history that stretched back through generations of families. They thought of the memories they would make here, the holidays, the birthdays, the little moments that would come to define their family. It was a house with soul, a place that felt like it had witnessed love and laughter, challenges and triumphs. And now, they were part of that story. But sometimes perfection can hide shadows. Sometimes the most beautiful places hold secrets just beneath the surface. And though Derek and Maria couldn't know it yet, their dream home held something dark, something that was waiting for them to arrive. The first sign was small, almost insignificant. It was a feeling, a sense that maybe things weren't quite as they seemed, but they brushed it off as new house jitters, that natural sense of unease that comes with settling into an unfamiliar place. It was, after all, a big house, old, with its own sounds and quirks, each one adding to its character. Still, as days passed, Derek found himself glancing over his shoulder. At first he shrugged it off, attributing it to the stress of moving, the adjustments to a new town. But that feeling, that subtle prickling, like being watched, lingered. It was easy to dismiss, to laugh off, but it was there, persistent and strange, like an unwelcome guest just beyond sight. They had no way of knowing then that someone else was watching, someone who had taken an intense interest in their arrival at 657 Boulevard. For this person, their move-in was an event, a moment they had anticipated, planned for, and had waited patiently to witness. Derek and Maria carried on, filling their home with the rhythms of daily life. They arranged furniture, unpacked the last boxes, hung family photos. The house was starting to feel like theirs, yet the sense of something unseen lingered, as though they weren't the only ones who felt at home within its walls. Then, on an ordinary morning, an envelope appeared in their mailbox. It was unmarked, a plain, nondescript envelope that looked as innocent as any other piece of mail. Derek opened it, expecting perhaps a flyer or a welcome letter from a local organization, but the words inside were anything but welcoming. It read, "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." The handwriting was precise, almost clinical, each letter carefully formed as though chosen with intention. The language on the surface was polite, But there was something unsettling about it. A coldness, a formality that felt wrong. Derek read on. "How did you end up here? 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s, and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time." A sense of unease settled over him. What did this person mean by waiting for its second coming? And why did they speak of watching the house as if it were their duty? The letter continued. "Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within its walls?" Derek could feel his hands growing cold, a chill creeping up his spine. Whoever had written this letter was no friendly neighbor. This wasn't a welcome note, it was a message. The house he had seen as a place of safety and joy now felt like a stranger, as if it held something back. Derek looked around, a new awareness creeping in. They had wanted to belong here. But someone else already claimed this place, and they were watching, waiting for something only they knew. The first letter had been strange enough, but Derek and Maria tried to dismiss it as a prank. After all, people sometimes left anonymous notes, and in a neighborhood as old as Westfield, maybe someone was overly nostalgic about the house. They left it on the kitchen counter, an odd curiosity more than anything, and went about their day, deciding it was best not to give it too much thought. But when the second letter arrived, any lingering doubt about it being a harmless prank was shattered. This time, the letter was even darker, even more personal. "Welcome again to 657 Boulevard, Derek and Maria," it began. Their names were spelled out clearly, as though the writer was speaking directly to them. The familiarity felt invasive, almost a violation of their privacy. How did this person know their names? The letter continued. "I have been waiting for you. The house is excited to have you here. It has been waiting for its young blood to arrive, as I requested. It needs you and your family to fill its walls with life again." The phrase "young blood" sent a chill down Derek's spine. There was something cold and clinical about it, as though this watcher saw them as pieces in a puzzle, as though they were simply there to fulfill a strange, ancient request. He read on, feeling his heartbeat quicken. "I have seen you have children. So far, I think there are 3 that I have counted. Are there more on the way? Or perhaps you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested?" The words on the page seemed to pulse with a twisted familiarity. Not only did this person know they had children, but they seemed obsessed with the fact, watching their every move as though taking notes on their lives. Maria's reaction was one of horror mixed with disbelief. They immediately called the police, who arrived to take a statement and examine the letter. The officers were concerned, but explained that, without any direct threat, there was little they could do. They advised the Broadduses to stay vigilant and to report any further letters. But beyond that, there were no answers, only more questions. Derek and Maria felt a sense of helplessness growing. They had expected the police to step in to somehow find a way to trace the letters back to their source. But as the officers left, their empty assurances only heightened the family's fear. There was no culprit, no fingerprints, no clues, just words on paper, words that kept coming. The days that followed were filled with an eerie silence. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, that every step he took was being observed. Even in the house he felt exposed, as if invisible eyes were following him through each room. At first, he tried to ignore it, to tell himself he was being paranoid. But that strange awareness of being watched lingered, growing stronger, like a shadow he couldn't escape. Then, the third letter arrived. This time, the tone was even darker, more aggressive. The watcher seemed to relish in his knowledge of their lives, detailing intimate moments with a chilling precision. He described seeing Derek leave for work, the times Maria took the children outside, even noting the exact times the children played in the yard. "You are not in control of this house," the letter read. "I am. 657 Boulevard has belonged to my family for generations, and you are merely guests. Do not test me, Derek and Maria. I am always watching, always closer than you think." Derek's stomach twisted as he read the letter, feeling trapped, vulnerable. The Watcher wasn't just observing their lives. They were asserting a claim over them, as if they had some twisted ownership of the family. Every word felt like a violation, a reminder that they were not safe, that the life they had hoped to build in their new home was being pulled out from under them. By now, Maria was beside herself with fear. They didn't dare let the children play outside, and Derek began checking each lock and window obsessively, making sure every possible entry point was secure. The Watcher seemed to have invaded every part of their lives, turning their sanctuary into a place of fear. Derek and Maria tried to reach out to the neighbors, hoping someone might have seen or heard something unusual, but the responses were unsettling in their own way. Some neighbors dismissed the letters as harmless pranks, chalking it up to an old-town myth or some local eccentric with too much time on their hands. Others seemed evasive, glancing away or changing the subject. Was it that they didn't know anything? Or was there something they didn't want to share? The sense of isolation grew stronger. The Watcher had not only stolen their peace, but had made the entire neighborhood feel alien and hostile. Everyone looked like a suspect, and the sense of belonging they'd felt just days ago was replaced with doubt and paranoia. The letters continued to arrive, each one like a new blow, each one laced with veiled threats and eerie familiarity. One line stuck with Derek more than any other, seeping into his mind and gnawing at his sense of security. "You should be afraid," it read. "The house knows you don't belong, and I am here to ensure you understand that." The words left Derek and Maria in a state of constant fear. Each night, Derek would check the windows and doors, peering out into the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person tormenting them, but there was never anyone there. Only silence and the feeling of eyes hidden somewhere in the shadows. The police continued to offer little assistance. Despite their best efforts, the letters remained untraceable, bearing no fingerprints or clues. It was as if the Watcher was a ghost, slipping through the cracks, hiding in plain sight. Derek and Maria were trapped in a nightmare, prisoners in their own home. They found themselves whispering late at night, trying to piece together what little they knew. Who was this person? Why did they seem to feel such a deep connection to 657 Boulevard? And how could they know so much about their family? In the dead of night, the house seemed to shift, each shadow feeling like a figure lurking, each sound amplified by the silence. They lay awake, gripped by the realization that the Watcher's words were not just idle threats, they were claims, a twisted manifesto of ownership over the house and their lives. And with each new letter, Derek and Maria's world shrank. The promise of 657 Boulevard had turned into a prison of fear, and the presence of the Watcher loomed over them, a haunting reminder that they were never truly alone. The letters kept coming, as if the Watcher were growing bolder, more confident, tightening their hold on the family, daring them to stay, daring them to confront a force that remained unseen but ever present. The Broaddus family had reached their breaking point. Fear had taken root in every corner of their lives, and 657 Boulevard was no longer a home but a gede. Derek and Maria knew they couldn't face this alone any longer. They had tried to ignore it, tried to rationalize it, but the Watcher's presence loomed too large, darkening every moment they spent in the house. They were desperate for answers, and the uncertainty was eating away at their sanity. Their first step was to contact the police again, hoping that maybe this time they would be able to take more decisive action. But once again, they were met with sympathetic yet frustrated responses. The police had no real evidence to go on, no fingerprints or direct threats that could justify opening an official investigation. Without a crime, their hands were tied, and all they could do was advise Derek and Maria to be vigilant. The letters disturbing as they were, weren't enough to warrant legal action. It felt like a hollow comfort, as though they were being told to sit tight and endure the nightmare. Undeterred, Derek decided to take matters into his own hands. He hired a private investigator, a seasoned professional who had dealt with his share of strange cases. This investigator combed through every detail, conducting background checks, scouring records, and even interviewing neighbors. But each lead was a dead end. The watcher had left no trace. The letters provided no clues, no way of tracing them back to their source. It was as if this person was a ghost, slipping through every attempt to expose them. In their desperation, Derek and Maria found themselves questioning everyone in the neighborhood. They started with casual conversations, subtly probing their neighbors for any hints or rumors about previous incidents. But their questions seemed to unnerve people more than they expected. Some neighbors were supportive, offering sympathy and reassurance, but others grew distant, wary. Derek couldn't shake the feeling that people were hiding something, that they knew more than they were willing to admit. One older neighbor hinted at the house's history, mentioning families who had lived there before but moved out abruptly. She dismissed it as coincidence, but her eyes held a trace of something unsaid, something she either couldn't or wouldn't explain. The more Derek and Maria asked, the clearer it became that 657 Boulevard had a dark history, one woven into the fabric of the neighborhood, a story people didn't speak about openly. The Broad Deuces started to feel like strangers in their own town. A place that once felt warm and inviting now seemed filled with shadows, as though every corner, every glance held a secret they couldn't access. Derek felt isolated, like he was fighting an invisible battle in a town where everyone else knew the rules but refused to share them. Desperate for some sort of answer, Derek even consulted a paranormal investigator. He wasn't one to believe in the supernatural, but he was willing to explore any possibility if it meant bringing peace back to his family. The investigator walked through the house, conducting rituals and using equipment to detect any unusual energy. But in the end, he could offer no explanation, only an uneasy sense that something dark lingered there. He advised Derek to leave, to abandon the house and let it return to whatever forces seemed to claim it. But Derek couldn't bring himself to give up, not yet. Meanwhile, Maria was becoming a shadow of her former self. Once warm and full of life, she now seemed hollow, her face etched with worry. She avoided looking out the windows, keeping the curtains drawn as if to shield herself from the watcher's invisible gaze. She was terrified, and Derek knew that their children sensed it too. The fear was palpable, filling their home with a tension that even their young children could feel. In their most vulnerable moments, Derek and Maria began to wonder if leaving was their only option. But the thought of selling the house was complicated. How could they explain the reason for leaving? And who would take it off their hands if they did? They felt trapped, financially and emotionally bound to a house that had betrayed them. It was their dream home turned nightmare, and there seemed to be no escape. In a final attempt to protect themselves, they installed a high-end security system. Cameras covered every angle, motion detectors monitored each room, and alarms were set to catch even the slightest movement. For a while, this new level of security brought a sense of control, a thin layer of reassurance. But the cameras captured nothing unusual. No lurking figure, no intruder creeping around the property. And then, almost as if in response to their efforts, another letter arrived. I see you have installed cameras," the letter read. "Nice try, Derek and Maria, but no amount of security will protect you from me. The house wants you gone. I want you gone." The message was clear. The watcher was always one step ahead. Derek and Maria were left in a state of shock, their sense of security shattered yet again. The house itself felt as though it had turned against them, as if it were conspiring with the watcher to drive them out. With no options left, they considered contacting the media. Maybe public attention would drive the watcher away, or at least bring enough pressure for the police to take stronger action. But the thought of going public brought its own risks: humiliation, unwanted attention, and the possibility of further angering the watcher. They were trapped in a nightmare of unanswered questions, an endless cycle of fear and helplessness. Every day felt like a new test, a reminder that they were intruders in a place they had thought was theirs. And the watcher's letters were relentless, each one a reminder that they had no power, no control over their own lives. In quiet moments, Derek found himself staring at the walls, feeling a strange certainty that the house itself was listening, watching and waiting. He wondered if he would ever find pause, if they would ever feel safe again. Each night, as they locked the doors and checked the windows, they felt like prisoners, barricading themselves from a presence they couldn't escape. The Broaddus family was alone, isolated, and no one could or would help them. They realized with painful clarity that they were on their own in this battle, trapped in a place that was no longer their home, but a haunted shell, echoing with the unseen eyes of a stranger who had claimed their lives without ever showing his face. As Derek and Maria sat in the silence of 657 Boulevard, they understood finally that they were up against something far beyond their understanding. They had tried everything, reaching out for help, fighting to hold on to the life they'd built, but the house had claimed them, and the Watcher's grip seemed impossible to break. In the end, the Broaddus family could take no more. The letters had become unbearable, each one a reminder that they were powerless against a force they could neither see nor stop. The Watcher had stolen their peace, their security, and any hope of making 657 Boulevard a true home. They felt caged, haunted by a stranger who had burrowed into their lives without ever showing his face. The decision was agonizing, but Derek and Maria knew it was time to leave. Walking through the house one last time, they felt a profound sadness. The dreams they'd had for this place, the memories they'd hoped to build within its walls, had been shattered. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with the weight of their broken hopes. They had come seeking a sanctuary, a place where their children could grow, but the house had turned against them. Leaving felt like surrender, but it was their only choice. As they packed up their things, they tried to push away the lingering sense of defeat. They had fought so hard, reaching out for help, seeking answers, but each attempt had only deepened the mystery. The Watcher had become more than a threat. He was a ghost in their lives, haunting every thought, every choice they made. They felt as though they were escaping a cage, a trap that had been set long before they had arrived. Their departure from 657 Boulevard was quiet. No one came to see them off, and they didn't tell their neighbors they were leaving. They slipped away, almost as if fleeing from something too dark, too incomprehensible to explain. As they drove away, they couldn't help but wonder what would happen to the house, what future awaited the next family who might fall under its spell. For Derek and Maria, the mystery of the Watcher would remain an open wound, an unanswered question that lingered in their minds. Who was the Watcher? Why had he targeted their family? And perhaps most hauntingly, would he continue to haunt 657 Boulevard, waiting for the next young blood to enter his domain? They would never know the answers. In time, they would settle elsewhere, trying to rebuild the life they had lost. But the memory of 657 Boulevard would follow them, an unresolved chapter that lay just beneath the surface. Sometimes, Derek would find himself staring into the distance, wondering if the Watcher still watched, if he waited patiently for another family, another chapter in the dark story of the house. Even after they were gone, 657 Boulevard held on to its secrets, as silent and impenetrable as ever. The house stood alone, quiet and empty, a beautiful shell hiding shadows that no one could truly understand. And somewhere, perhaps nearby or far away, the Watcher waited, his eyes on the house, his gaze fixed on the lives of strangers who would come after, stepping unknowingly into his story. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you never miss an update.